We're your hosts,
Aaron Bacus
and Jason Kindler.
We like to sit down with our guests to hear their journey, their challenges, and how they impact the local community.
So grab a seat, tune in, and let's get inspired by Jacksonville's everyday workforce.
Welcome to Hometown Jax. I am so excited. I have Mike Buresh here. Thank you for coming on the Hometown Jax podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You know, it was fun emailing people that put their email address on a website. You don't know if you get a response, but you responded right back.
I tell all my staff, I said, we will answer all emails before close of business.
Wow.
And it may not be always positive or perfect or whatever, but we will. That's always what I do.
Do you get a lot of emails, people asking you to be on a podcast, though?
No, that's an unusual one.
Exactly.
So well done. Well played.
I wasn't complaining about weather or anything.
Right. Yeah, it was refreshing.
So I want to go through your story a little bit, and then I want to hear about weather.
Right.
Weather is the talking point forever. I feel like the older I get, I sound like my parents that are always talking about the weather.
Like the commercial.
Exactly. So I'm sure you know a little bit about that. So I want to start right off with a bang. I like to ask a question that just kind of gets right into it. What's the scariest weather event you've ever covered? Can you think of one off the top of your mind?
Scariest?
Yeah, like
did I was actually in the office covering it with warnings and that sort of thing.
Right,
would be a flash flood in Cincinnati.
Really?
In 1997.
Interesting. All the hurricanes, everything else, you remember the flash flood.
Yes, but there would be a pretty quick list of top 5, 6, 7.
Tell us about the flood. Like, was it violent and quick? Or?
It was violent. It was more like after the fact, it looked like a tornado. It was the most devastating thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was devastating on a number of levels, professionally and personally, because I started working that shift on a Friday night, and there was one meteorologist out of town, and I didn't get home till Tuesday night, literally.
Wow.
And through Sunday morning, and Cincinnati sits on the Ohio River, is having a pretty serious flood this year.
Right.
Not anywhere close to the 1997 flood, but still pretty significant. But the Ohio River had a flash flood, which is a once-in-a-generation type thing. A river that magnitude, that size, doesn't typically flash flood. So we had that occurring over the weekend.
And how do you know that the flash flood is coming?
You don't. That's the worst part. We knew it was a serious setup for flooding and rain. There were watches and warnings in effect, but we never knew exactly the magnitude because it was passing the levels of history. It was historical. We never had precedence for it, and the gauges that were measuring it were destroyed. So we were going off observations, talking to people, telephones back then. You didn't have much in the way of cell service, and there was no World Wide Web, believe it or not. That's how old I am. And so it was an extreme event, and I'll never forget, on Sunday morning, I thought we had gotten through it essentially unscathed. We knew there were rescues going on, and then I found out during the newscast that there were fatalities in this small town. We were northern Kentucky, southwest Ohio, southeast Indiana when you're a Cincinnati market. Mm-hmm. And there were fatalities in this smaller town in northern Kentucky, and it crushed me.
Oh, I can imagine.
Crushed me. It was a failure.
Imagine. That is that's pretty striking that you think of a flood when I thought you would have said hurricane or something like that, because you spent a lot of your career up in the Midwest area,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, the flash flood is one, and then 2 years later was an EF4 tornado in the early morning hours in Cincinnati that was also devastating for a number of reasons. And I covered all of these after the fact. After I was done with my TV thing and we kind of had everything under control in the studio, they'd send me out to cover the stuff live. And so that was another big one. An ice storm in Des Moines was the first TV job I ever had in the late 1980s. I was very young, just out of college. And we had 2 inches of rain with a temperature below freezing. That looked like a tornado. It was the amount of damage that an ice storm can do is ridiculous.
Absolutely. It's not something you think about.
In Jacksonville are all the tropical storms and hurricanes.
Right.
I mean, start with Bonnie and Charlie in 2004 and go to last year, Helene and Milton.
Right.
So
that one last year that went up through the Panhandle and went into North Carolina.
Helene.
Like, you're talking about hurricanes in North Carolina.
Right.
It's just hard to conceptualize.
It is. It's happened before, but it's not a common event. And then there were a lot of other factors that came in together to make that especially devastating. And that's a generational storm. They'll be cleaning up for that for years, and that's the most deadly hurricane since Katrina in 2005 for the U.S.
Wow. Gosh, I just didn't put it in that perspective. Well, we're going to get in some great stuff, but I want to talk about your history. So,
or lack thereof.
Well, it sounds like you knew from day one, age 2, that you wanted to be in
Yes.
weather. I saw a quote where your mom was saying you were always looking into the sky. Is that
That's
right?
correct. That's exactly
Literally,
right.
you knew that.
I knew what I wanted to do since I was in 2nd grade.
Wow.
Now, when I say I knew what I wanted to do, it was meteorology. It was weather. Now, I didn't know if it was going to be television or what that outlet was going to be, but that's where it's gone, and I am tickled pink.
Wow.
I mean, there are.
So you can remember vividly, the
I
light
can
bulb
remember
went
the
on.
instant.
Wow. It
I was
too?
in 2nd grade.
Okay.
2nd grade, so 7 years old.
Sorry, right.
But still pretty young. And there was we were in school, and it was the teacher told us, it was during the winter, and the teacher said, "Oh, look outside, it's snowing and the sun's out." And so we all go to the window and we're looking outside. Clicked, apparently. And it was weird back then because my parents were like, their kids want to do, they want to be a doctor, they want to be a lawyer, they want to be a football player, they want to be a basketball player, which all those things interested me. But they're like, what do we do with a kid that wants to talk about the weather or see the weather? And they were incredible. They took me to all kinds of things as I was growing up to learn about the weather. I mean, all over the place. The Storm Prediction Center that is now in Oklahoma City back then was in Kansas City. They drove me to Kansas City, and I got a tour of the Storm Prediction Center, which issues all the tornado watches and severe thunderstorm watches. And the meteorologist that showed me around, I got to meet at a weather summit with the company that I'm with now in television, 6 or 7 years ago, which was incredible for me. He had no idea who I was, of course. He's probably had a bunch of kids come through and tour, but I'll never forget that.
That's pretty amazing.
Great to see that kind of outreach, to see people in places where they'll let kids come through and help you out. And then I had a high school guidance counselor that told me I couldn't make a living in weather.
That's what I was going to ask you next. There had to be some doubters along the way.
And
what did she say? You need to find something else?
He told me you need to find something else. Take that aptitude test, that bubble test that says what you're going to do in your career and be good at or better at or like. So I did, and it was always weather. I picked out my school in 9th grade. I went to that school after I graduated. I actually transferred in the end, but graduated with an atmospheric science degree, and off we went.
Wow, that's interesting.
And it's almost to a point where it was almost too straight of a path, because I don't understand people that don't have that path in a lot of ways.
Not everybody knows, Mike, when they're in second grade.
Most don't.
Right.
and I think my kids were really frustrated growing up because, I'd be like, what do you mean you don't know?
you have little empathy for indecision, is what you're saying. Is that true?
My wife would tell you that. So it was it was a strange path, but I couldn't be happier with the weather part of it. I as long as I can be talking weather, looking at weather, seeing the weather.
So it still fires you up.
Oh, the weather's awesome.
Wow, that's interesting.
Weather's awesome. It's sunrise, sunset, a rainbow, thunderstorm, hurricane, tornado. Yeah. It's all fantastic. It's incredible.
That it is.
And we'll never be able to predict it, which is even better. And by better, I mean, it's the one thing we don't really know well enough.
With all the technology, with all the stuff.
We're better than we've ever been.
Right.
We'll get a little better, but we're never going to nail it. And AI is not going to nail it either, by the way. So that's intriguing when there's something out there still that we don't truly, really understand that has a higher position than humans and AI.
Do you feel like that there's a way that we could affect it in a positive way? Like, you always hear this technology or something you send up into a tornado that disperses it. Is that real? Or?
Yeah, I think it is real, actually, but you got to be very careful messing with Mother Nature.
Correct.
And the balance that is Mother Nature and our ecosystem and the environment. I'm very anti
messing with it.
Yeah, very, very much so. And that's the basic reason is because it all exists for a reason. We have this delicate balance for a reason. And if we start messing with it, hurricanes occur for a reason, and a very good reason.
What's the reason?
Because it's transferring heat from the tropics to the polar regions.
Okay.
And that's a balance, and that's a critical, and it causes the currents of our oceans, and it's a very delicate eco balance, meteorological balance that has to occur for the weather to occur in a quote unquote normal manner.
Interesting.
And
Never thought of it like that.
If you interrupt it, you're playing God essentially.
Right.
And boy, that's a tough job.
Don't want to do that.
No, I really don't. I think we would do more harm in the end And then, so the other point is, okay, so then why would you not try to weaken a Cat 5 hurricane that's moving into wherever? Well, then I would answer, don't build on the coast so you don't get plastered by a Cat 5 hurricane.
Yes.
Or build a lot sturdier, or whatever the case might be.
Right.
It's not up to us to change the environment, the world, the weather. It's up to us to adapt and be smart in how we do it.
Agreed. I saw something that popped up about you that you were a storm chaser. So
Back in the day?
I envisioned this person like the movie Twister driving a van into a tornado.
Right.
Is that what you did?
Yeah, it's hard for me to watch Twister because it's not realistic. But yes, I storm chased at the University of Oklahoma in the 1980s, back when it was a true art. Because you didn't have radar in your hand. I mean, it was, you knew where you were going and did what you did and did it well because you were smart about what you were doing.
Predicting where it would be.
Right. And it wasn't easy. In a lot of tornado chases, you didn't get a tornado.
Right.
So yes, it was fascinating. And I do not have any empathy or sympathy for the people that drive into a tornado and have a scare, because that's unacceptable. The best storm chaser gets great video of the tornado or the storm, whatever the case might be, and doesn't get wet. And
that's
if you
the
don't
goal
get
of the
wet,
storm.
You'll be safe.
Right.
And we also just had a post last week from a person I actually respect in the business that was out storm chasing and is one of those online chasers that's pretty common nowadays, and YouTube channel, all that stuff. And he almost got struck by lightning. I mean, it was a very close lightning strike, and that's a storm chase cardinal rule. If you're near the storm, and by near, within 10 miles, because lightning can travel 10 miles from the parent cloud, you don't get out of your car. If you get out, you're a lightning rod.
Right.
Very simple, straightforward rules.
Interesting. So what is the goal of the storm chase? Just to get footage?
It's nowadays, it's typically really just to get footage, to
Right.
get clicks, and in some cases, they're making money off of it. We don't buy anything at Action News Jax in that regard. Back in the 80s, it was true research up to, and still is in some cases. The University of Oklahoma is still storm chasing with students and faculty. And you're getting good data on, and the goal was, and always has been, how can we get better, more accurate, advanced warnings?
Right.
That's the key.
I'm glad you brought up Action News Jax. That's awesome. You are with Action News Jax now. How long have you been?
Been at CBS 47 and Fox 30 Action News Jax since 2002. So what is that? 23 years.
That's a lot of years.
23 years.
Well, I feel I never quite understood the channels, because I feel like you're on multiple channels and whatever.
Well, we are. We're a duopoly, which is, not only is it unusual to have one duopoly in a market, we have two duopolies.
Right.
So we're CBS and we're Fox. Then we're on a bunch of radio stations.
Okay.
So you'll hear us on the radio. And then, of course, a lot of social media and our app. But we're a duopoly. And you really, quite honestly, in a perfect world, you don't have duopolies, because you want as much diversity as you can in a television market.
Well,
media
what
market.
made me think of it was when you were talking about people taking video. Do you have like a stable of reliable people out there that send you stuff that you believe, that you use? Like,
Yeah.
Because you said you didn't buy anything. That's what prompted me.
We have a combination of people that we know we can count on, and people that will just send stuff in, and then we ask for permission to use it. And if they give us permission and it looks legit, and it's pretty easy to tell whether or not it's legit, then we can use it. And nowadays it's so easy to get video, and so you get a lot of. And the other day we were tracking a tornado through Waycross, Georgia, which is in our viewing area.
Right.
And I was getting play-by-play from a storm spotter in Waycross while I was on the air, which is pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
And it gives you confidence in what you're seeing and doing and predicting and forecasting and what you're telling people that are in its path.
Yeah, because you're seeing it happen.
Right.
I want to kind of talk about a little about your history. So tell me about the seal approval thing.
Okay, so
Sounds like a big deal.
Well, it means I've got some education, I guess. You have to be a degreed meteorologist, and actually the AMS seal of approval has now been replaced by the certified broadcast meteorologist.
Okay.
So the AMS seal went away in about between 2005 and 2010. Up until then, it was the seal of approval was the highest level that you could get in broadcast meteorology. So I attained that early in my career. And
Is it kind of like a PhD of meteorology?
Sure, let's go with that.
Okay.
Because I'm never going to be a doctor otherwise. and then they replaced that with a CBM, which is a little more stringent. You actually take a written test. So despite having a degree, and you have to be a degree meteorologist to begin with. Then you take a written test. You also have to send your videos in of your TV forecasts. You get judged by a panel of judges, And then if you're past the test and you pass the video, then you are awarded the CBM, and then you have to keep that up and active throughout your career.
Interesting. Interesting.
It's a good way to do it. It delineates. That's how I get asked a lot of times. I keep telling people, I said, I'd love for you to come to me on social media, TV, or wherever it is, my app or whatever the case might be, to get the forecast and warnings and that sort of thing. But I realize that you're not always going to do that, or you may not want to do that,
right.
Whatever the case is. But boy, I hope you're not listening to Joe Blow out there or Jill Blow out there that's just pontificating about something they know nothing about.
Interesting.
In case it could be weather.
Right.
And so the CBM at least sets us apart in that regard. And people have asked me, how do you know? And I'm like, well, look for their CBM right there. They should have that in there.
I would think so.
Yeah.
So going back to school, was it a 4-year degree?
It's a 4-year degree, but it's essentially an engineering degree. So it's a lot of math and science, heavy math and science. And I was not gifted in math. I can do arithmetic with my eyes closed, and I can do simpler mathematics very quickly and very easily. But this is high-end calculus 1 and 2, physics 1 and 2, chem 1 and 2, thermodynamics, all this math stuff. So it's a very intense degree. Very few people really finish in 4 years, especially back in my day, because you didn't have AP courses where you could actually come into college with already college credits.
Right.
So it's a long process. It was a 5-year deal for me.
Was there something after that, or you?
Well, you could go on to master's and PhD. I did not. I was done with school and still am.
Okay. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Although you're constantly learning in any job, in any business, I think probably, and certainly meteorology is one of those. And with technology so quickly changing, you have to.
Right.
So you're constantly learning. In every storm, we learn something from, unless you don't pay attention.
Right.
So there's a process of continuing education, formally and informally, throughout the career, no doubt.
Well, obviously, it got you enough to get your first job in Des Moines.
Right, Des Moines,
So
Iowa.
you went right on TV.
Well, no, that's a good point and a good question. So I graduated from college. I ended up graduating from Iowa State University. I grew up in a little town in Iowa, and that's where that seed was started for
predominant weather events there.
Tornadoes, tremendous. Well, tornadoes and snowstorms. I mean, you would go from
snowstorms,
massive winter storms to these summer. Yeah, so it was a great place to grow up in crazy weather, although the winters are long.
Yes.
And so I got my first TV. So I got out of college, and actually at 23, I was like, I don't think I can get into TV at 23 years old.
That's kind of what I was like wondering. That
I had long hair. I was young. I actually had hair then. So
yes.
So I had a teaching certificate in science and mathematics. So I got a teaching job in Des Moines, Iowa, actually, inner city Des Moines, Iowa, which is the biggest town.
Teaching weather.
Biggest city in Iowa. Teaching science.
Okay.
But weather was part of that.
Okay.
Their weather unit was ridiculously long because I was teaching it.
Right.
But so I got that gig right away because I needed a job. I mean, I was out of college. And so for $18,000 a year, I took my teaching job in Des Moines, Iowa, and I loved it. There were a lot of things positive about it. I knew it wasn't going to be my career, but I did enjoy it. It also taught me a lot of lessons. And I still have kids that will reach out to me to this day from 2 years
that
of
class.
teaching in Des Moines. Yeah, it's
Wow.
incredible.
That is incredible.
And it was a big learning experience in a lot of ways. It taught me about the education system. It taught me about students. It taught me about young people. It taught me about their parents. And it taught me about what I didn't want to do for the rest of my career. And I'm telling you right now, teachers are terribly underrated and obviously underpaid.
Agreed.
But it just wasn't going to be for my career. And I got lucky the second year I had a meteorologist come in from the TV station there to just talk to the kids as part of their weather unit.
A parent or something?
A meteorologist, on-air meteorologist.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in Des Moines.
Interesting.
And I said, hey, by the way, I've got a degree in meteorology. He's like, you're kidding me. And I'm like, no. And he said, well, come on in. And that was the beginning of my TV career. And within a year, they offered me full-time, and I resigned from teaching, and it's been TV weather ever since.
Well, so you were pretty certain you wanted to be in meteorology. Were you certain you wanted to be in TV?
No, not initially, but
Okay.
Once I got into college, I thought of that as being a decent avenue if I could pull it off. And back then, it was extremely competitive.
Well,
it
it's
still
competitive.
is, but it was
There was less outlets to do it, right?
far fewer outlets, and people stayed in the career. So you always started out at a small market, almost always, and worked your way up. So so I saw that as an avenue, and when this meteorologist came into the station, or into the classroom, I thought it was ridiculous for me not to at least throw a lob in there and see what comes of it. And so and once I got in there, then I was pretty sure that that's the route I wanted to take.
Do you develop your reputation of being accurate to where that gets you up the ranks? Or
well, accuracy certainly helps.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, it's TV, so they're looking at you too.
Right.
And I've seen.
So you had to cut your hair at that point.
That's actually kind of a funny story. So in Des Moines, I'm young. I didn't really know the ins and outs of television. I knew what I wanted to do, and I really didn't care about my hair. But then I got to realize that was an issue because my boss kept coming in and saying, "Buresh, you got to cut your hair." And so I started. My barber would start to cut it just a little bit each time, and it would just infuriate him. And then it was probably a year later. He said, "Buresh, that's finally about where it ought to be." It was kind of funny, but
and then let you on TV.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a massive learning curve because I'd done no television. I didn't have any television experience. I didn't do it in college.
Were you petrified, nervous, or you felt like it came?
It's funny you'd ask that.
Naturally.
A lot of it was natural. My mom said I had the gift of gab, which is true. But I'll say this to this day to a lot of people that ask me when they're going to do big speeches or address a group of people. If you know your material, your subject matter, you're fine.
Right. The
rest of it will just come. You'll be fine. Mm-hmm. So I always thought to myself, well, I know weather and meteorology. Now I don't know how to do something like something specific in TV maybe, but I always felt like I could learn that. And as long as I had the true subject matter, what I have to deliver, which is the most important thing to my audience, I would be okay. And I still believe that today.
Interesting. Was it hard there in the beginning? Like, did you see weather events like, man, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't even know what to say. Who do I ask? Or did you have a mentor?
I had mentors.
Yes.
And since I had an interest in weather since second grade, I saw so much. I never felt like that particularly. I mean, I learned a lot. I watched a lot. And most of it was in delivery and how you communicate a course, and perception is a big deal. And
do you get? I don't know why. Do you get like people angry at you?
Oh yes, yes. I'm much better now though, letting go off the back of my shoulders here and not even think about it than I used to be. But oh yeah, sometimes they're just angry about the tie I wear.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean,
oftentimes the weather forecast. So I mean, it's not a perfect science. It's never going to be, and people need to realize that. And it's even funnier to me now that people haven't. For a while, when the app was new, say 10, 12 years ago, the app world, people suddenly started to gravitate to the app and like, oh, these apps are great, and then they're like, oh, they're not right every time either. I'm like, no, they're not right every time. In fact, I'm your best app is what I'll oftentimes say. I can out forecast virtually every app out there. I'm convinced of that.
Well, I believe it because when you see the radar on the apps, I mean, that's kind of too late, right?
Right, it's there, it's occurring.
Right.
So you need a forecast. You need to see what's happening, and some of them do extrapolate that, but that's an imperfect science as well.
Do you have some? What's the right really important organizations or people that ask you for weather events, like big shipping companies that are out in the ocean? I don't know, just something that's like very important that it could really affect a lot of lives.
Yes, I can't be specific about all of them, believe it or not, but yes, football teams, professional football teams.
Interesting. Well, we have one of those,
right? Construction workers are a common one. And a lot of times they're like, well, I've got my app, but I need a human to tell me and interpolate that and interpret it. And I'm happy to do that. And so and events are a big thing too, of course.
Right.
And then severe weather.
Schools, something in schools. I'm assuming they come to you like, hey, should we do this or not?
Right.
Kind of
a lot of schools, church events sometimes.
Yes.
It runs the gamut. I'll get something. We get something every week, requests and questions.
Do you have multiple people helping you?
Yeah,
like
we've got
answer and all of that?
Yeah, we've got now. If I get a personal email, I answer it. But otherwise, we've got Garrett Beatonball in the mornings, weekdays. We've got Corey Simma in the afternoons on weekends. Trevor Gibbs in weekends in the mornings, and then those two will also function and move in and throughout the week. Great staff, hardworking. They want to come to work, which is refreshing these days.
And some admin people around that to help out with stuff. I don't know.
No, it's really us four.
Okay.
If you see it on our air, we've built it.
Right.
And we've done it. It is all of our own forecasts. We're all meteorologists. We're all CBM meteorologists. We're all certified meteorologists.
And
So-
are you kind of the senior on the?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely the oldest.
Okay.
But yeah, and I don't dictate a whole lot to them.
So that you guys are really calling it as you see it independently.
Exactly.
It's not a group think
No,
kind of thing.
we will pass our forecast on from one meteorologist to the next one because we are trying to keep a consistent message as much as possible. But if you have to change it, you have to change it. In extreme circumstances, I'll make a call. Hurricanes, we start with me. Super Bowl when it was here in 2005, that was a forecast that was always my forecast. And we would go from there. And so there are certain circumstances, but at the same time, I don't know everything, and we learn something from new storms and different things. And these guys may very well have something that didn't even look at or forgot or missed.
Right.
So I'm learning right along with them. So I'm happy to have. I want that input. That's
Right.
critical for us, and we have a great relationship. I have a great staff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they're great.
That's great.
And we have a freelancer, Sarah Cantley, also that works with us, and she's awesome. She's a CB
Freelancer,
meteorologist.
what does that
So
mean?
we have a freelance meteorologist that when we're really up against it for needing people to fill in and or storm coverage, she steps right in, and she's awesome. She's newer to the staff. She's been with us about 6-7 months maybe. She's great. I hope one day we can make her a full-timer.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So migrating down from the Midwest, when did you come to Florida?
So I came to Florida 23 years ago.
To Jacksonville.
Yes, and it was a crash course in coastal weather, oceans, marine weather.
What made you come down here?
They offered me a job.
Okay. There you go. That
It was an in-company move. I was in Cincinnati. I was doing the noon and 4 o'clock newscast there and filling in for the head guy all the time. So I had a lot of experience. I had some great opportunities there, 11, 12 years, wonderful opportunities. Did network stuff, did a documentary in Africa of all places. I had great opportunities. Really felt like I grew my career there substantially amongst professionals that were top in the field in many, many different areas. And so I told them, I said, I'm not going to sit here and wait for you. I can't sit here and wait forever for a better job.
Right.
And so they actually moved me within the company to Jacksonville, and they asked me, will you please give us at least 3 years to lay a foundation here? And I said, I'll give you 3 years. And so now it's been 22.
And when you say lay a
23.
foundation, there wasn't much
There
going
was
on? It
pretty
kinda
dilapidated station at the time.
Okay. Interesting.
So-
and it was TV right then?
TV,
or-
yep, it
Okay.
was. And at that point, we had just become the CBS affiliate because up to then, anybody that's been in this market for a long time, that's lived here, grew up here maybe, Channel 4 was the CBS affiliate up to 2002. So when they launched CBS, they became a CBS Fox duopoly. They wanted me to come in to kick it off along with a couple of other new news anchors and a sports anchor, and we were off to the races.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you were tasked with trying to revitalize it a little bit.
Correct, exactly. Yeah, I had nothing, I'll be quite honest, I didn't have a whole lot to lose. So
Right.
I could make it a little bit better, I could make it medium better, or I could make it a lot better, or somewhere.
How did you make it better? Like what
I
would
worked
you...
my butt off.
Right.
And, seriously, I mean, it was the hardest I've ever worked.
Did being more involved in the community, trying to promote, or how?
Everything.
What makes a news station?
Everything. We had very little equipment,
Okay.
very little technology. So I had to try to get the technology upgraded. We had only 2 other people on staff. That's not a very big staff for all the newscasts that we had. They didn't do anything at that point really with the web, which was at that point exploding in the early part of this century. And I didn't know the area. We didn't know anybody. My wife and I came here with a 2-year-old, and she had a baby in the belly.
Okay.
And what she did was amazing. Because I was not home.
Right.
I was at work almost constantly, it seemed like, anyway. And then we didn't know anybody. We didn't have a church. We didn't have doctors. So you're finding doctors. I came in. I drove in all night Friday night. I drove Friday night from Cincinnati. Did the 11 o'clock news in Cincinnati. I drove in Saturday morning, and on Monday I was on the air.
Wow.
And that's
Acting
not the way to do it. I wouldn't recommend it.
Acting like you knew about Florida weather all along.
Right. And I learned from that. And what I learned from that is, first of all, I'd never do it that way again. But more importantly, I would never put somebody else in that position. And I never have. I've always let my staff, when they've come in new, to have at least a week under their wings. And if they don't feel comfortable, we wait till they're comfortable. But it was fine. It worked out okay. But
how did you rely on some other people to really
you bet.
get up to speed on the Florida weather?
You bet I did.
Was that a big learning curve?
It was a big enough learning curve, yes. But I'm also fascinated by weather. So I didn't find it. At the time when I look back at everything we did, my wife and I have talked about this before. We're not sure how we did it, but I didn't see it that way. When we were in it, you don't see it that way. It's just a challenge. You're just working. We're pretty happy.
Well, you were passionate about it.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Makes it,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so first phone call I made when I got to Jacksonville was to the meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service, Steve Littrow. And we would have frequent lunches. I would bend his ear time and time again.
So he was here in Jacksonville?
He was here in Jacksonville. Still lives here. He's retired here now. And I learned a lot from him. And he was willing to let me ask any questions I wanted, and he had the answers. And then I got to know all the people at the National Weather Service really, really well. And they got to know me. And sometimes there can be that's not a common thing. Sometimes
be adversarial.
Yeah, it can, exactly.
Okay.
But I'm tight with all the Weather Service folks to this day, and I think I respect them, and I think they respect me. They know I'm not going to throw them under the bus. We need each other. We need to be able to communicate that message and make it in times of severe weather, and if there's evacuation somewhere in our viewing area because of a hurricane, for example, that message needs to be simple, concrete, and to the point, and uniform across the board. And so they're priceless. We've all had the same classes. We all had the same schooling. They're meteorologists. Most of them went to Florida State or took a Navy route. And then I had my schooling in meteorology at Oklahoma and Iowa State. You've got the same schooling. And then it comes down to, okay, what did you learn? What are you learning? And how do you communicate it and go on from there?
As you're talking about knowing people, I'm for some reason Jim Cantori comes to mind. And do you know him?
Yeah, I know Jim. Yeah.
Because what do they say? It's
Jim
not
Cantori
a good sign when Jim Cantori is broadcasting from your town.
It could be or not. It depends if they got the forecast right.
It's true. It's true. Do you ever desire to do that? To go to different storms?
No, I'm so happy in the local markets. Now, when I first came to Jacksonville, I wasn't sure that Jacksonville was our last stop. It's going to be our last stop, but we weren't sure at the time because, again, and people know this by watching television, people move a lot in this business typically until and unless you're at the top. And even if you're at the top, that doesn't necessarily mean you're staying.
But what's considered the top?
In my job, the chief meteorologist. In my case, the chief meteorologist.
Right. Okay.
So number one news anchors would be the main anchors in the evenings would be the number one job here.
So it's not to go the national.
Well, sure. Is
that considered better?
That would be it's higher pay.
Yeah.
It depends what you want. Here's why I didn't want the national. I had and I did a lot of national stuff. They used to pay very well back in the day, so it was a big pay bump for me.
Right.
And but the local level is so much more dynamic, so much more interesting, and you get to know the community, you get to know the people, and you can actually help the community. That is a really basic tenet of how I think this job should be done. I may or may not be right. I don't know, but that's how I've approached it, and that's how I think it should be approached. And why not make where you live a better place, if at all possible?
For sure.
Or help make it a better place. And you can't do that at the national level. And it's also probably more stressful at the national level, although I work a lot out. Can't imagine really working more hours than I have and did and do, but I've never, after I got to be past my probably 20s, the national thing was no longer a desire. And you can do, like any other job, if you do it well and you love it, you'll be successful and you'll make more money and money not necessarily. You'll be happier than ever, and the money will come to you. The good will come.
Speaking of your work, what does your typical workday look like? Are you on a consistent schedule since you're now the chief, or how does it work?
Typically, but there are some exceptions. But usually it's 2 p.m. to midnight. So I go in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We start with a 4 o'clock newscast. I've got to get everything ready. Got to get the forecast ready. Got to get the radio stations done, the web stuff done, and then we have a
5 days a week, or do you
Monday through Friday.
Okay.
So then we've got a 4, 5, 6, 10, 11 o'clock newscast. So I get home. I do get a dinner hour, so I'll go home for dinner for a while, if the weather's not a problem and everything else is caught up. And then I'll get home between midnight and 1 in the morning, and then I'm on live on the radio at 7 in the morning.
Wow.
From home.
Okay.
I have an in-house in the study studio.
Neat.
So I get up at 7 in the morning. So they're short nights, but I don't need a lot of sleep typically, and so that's an average day. And then if you throw in something like today, where I'm doing something a little extra, if I go to a school or if I go to some other function or we call them appearances, then that adds to the day. And that's not I don't get anything for that. I don't expect anything for it. Again, it's a community effort.
Are you on call? You're on call.
Yeah, we're on call pretty much 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So I know you mentioned you were traveling. Like, can you disconnect for 2 weeks and go on a vacation, or not?
It depends. Not in the hurricane season.
Right.
I don't disconnect during the hurricane season, and I don't travel internationally during the hurricane season. But from December through May, yes, I can and will disconnect. At least for
Very
a while.
willingly.
And better than I used to ever.
Yeah, yeah. You kind of addressed it a little bit. How has the field of meteorology changed over the years? I'm assuming it's just the technology is the main driving change.
Yeah, that's the biggie. Radar was a rare. To have your own weather radar up through the 1990s was rare. I was lucky in Des Moines. I was at one of the few TV stations in the entire nation that had their own radar. I drew the maps for it, hand drew the maps for that radar system, and using a protractor, believe it or not, and so that was great experience. But back then, that was right before then. They were still writing on the wall, more or less. You would write in a pen, a marker. In some cases, they would do chalk. Magnets for a while, and then by the time I was a TV meteorologist in the late 1980s, we were largely computer driven, but you still had to manually update everything.
Right.
So let's say I wanted to show a satellite loop from the last 24 hours or even 12 hours or whatever. You would call that up on a phone line back in the day. Wow. Remember that sound that it would make?
I do. Yeah, I do.
And you would wait as long as you can before the newscast because you wanted it as fresh as possible. And you would hope that everything worked out okay and that your imagery would be there. It was, it was really nip and tuck. And you'd had teletype printers that came out, and that would show you the temperatures. And you would plot those. Didn't have to hand plot them. You didn't have to write them, but you still had to hand plot them on a computer, to be ready. And the radar was right there for me. That was. Right
I would
now.
think like the being able to store and grab information now so fast is probably an advantage, so you can kind of see your history in the past.
It's remarkable now. I mean, it's so simple now. People can't even imagine. The people that I work with now can't imagine how we used to bring in data.
Right.
But I think we were better meteorologists back then, probably.
Well, yeah.
We were not textbook meteorologists, and we certainly weren't techno meteorologists, and we weren't driven by models.
Right.
And so you were better at identifying things that were happening in the atmosphere just by watching and looking and observing. Those to this day are still the best meteorologists.
Do you, I guess power going out where you are never happens. You got multiple generators, all this kind of stuff, so you can function all through a storm?
Correct. In theory, we are set up to endure any and all storms. Now, if the building was truly damaged or the transmission tower was truly damaged, something out beyond our control, then that might be more difficult. We have standby studios set up to evacuate to in Jacksonville and also outside of Jacksonville if we had to.
Interesting.
Yeah, it wouldn't be near as pretty, quote unquote, but we could get the job done. And again, at that point, it's information. I've told people many times in severe weather, I'm like, this isn't going to look like, all tied up together, all nice and neat, because it's not. I'm doing this off the cuff, and then we explain it.
Because we've never been hit by a 4-up, have we? Or
No. In fact,
is that because you always hear it because the Gulf Stream is way out and it kind of bends it? Is that true?
It's a combination of things. The Gulf Stream isn't near as close to us as it is South Florida. But the biggest thing is there are two things. One is that the jet stream oftentimes is dipping down into our area by the time the hurricane gets here, and it's being steered, but then by the jet stream, and oftentimes that either takes it away from Jacksonville or at least not very close to Jacksonville. And then secondly, the shape of our coastline, which is inland up all the way up into Fernandina Beach there to north of Jacksonville. It's at such an angle there, from southeast to northwest, that it's very difficult to get a hurricane of significant intensity in here. It's just not an angle of approach that's easy for a hurricane. So the closest we have is Dora. It goes all the way back to 1964, Category 2, and really not a high-end Category 2, because it came in from the due east, and that's really the only approach that would work. Now, it'll happen. That day will come.
Right.
But it's rare.
The day will come when we see a 4 or a 5.
I believe the day will come and we'll see at least a 3 or a 4.
Okay.
And it would be rare, and it's rare, and it is rare. But the day will come. Statistically, it has to come.
And that's what I was going to ask too. Is like, do the hurricanes move in patterns, like over time? Have you found that to be the case, or it can be? I feel like we had a string of not many storms there for 5-6 years or so.
You're exactly right. They're cyclic. You bet they are. And so, the Carolinas in the mid 90s were, you just didn't want to live there. They were getting pummeled year after year, and now they've had 2 or 3 this century.
Right.
Louisiana went many, many years, no problem at all. 2005, Katrina. Then they did go back through a lull, but then they had a terrible spell there around 2020. Florida had an incredibly dry spell after the big hurricane seasons of 04 and 05. 04 is kind of the poster child of this century for Florida. You had Bonnie, Charlie, Francis, Jean, and Ivan all hit Florida, big storms. Wow. And then in 05, you had Wilma, a Cat 3 go across South Florida, big damage there. And then we had nothing. No landfalling hurricane from 2006 through 2016, which is remarkable.
Right.
So remarkable.
Has that happened in history before?
Never. Good question.
Interesting.
Never has happened. Never have we gone that long. And then, so now, all of a sudden, then you're like, wow, are we done with hurricanes? And then, of course, we realize not so fast,
Right.
2007, because Mother Nature's all about making it even, averaging things out. So it's just a matter of time. And now we've had all these big storms that have hit the Panhandle and West Florida in particular. But one area that's prone to many hurricanes and that hasn't been hit often is Southeast Florida.
Right.
I mean, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm. You go back to 04, it was significant, although not as severe as it could have been. And then you're going back to 1992 and Andrew, and it hit south of Miami. It could have been even worse if it had been a little more north. But that's a spot that everybody's sort of like, we're not going to be happy when Mother Nature tries to average things up or make
For
up
some
the lost
reason,
time.
it made me think of the bay in Tampa where the water gets sucked out.
Yeah. Or it gets pushed in. Either one. Depends on where the hurricane is.
But literally, it gets sucked out so you can see land forever, and then it comes back in.
And we've seen it happen multiple times in the last few years.
That is just wild.
Yeah, it is
think
wild.
about.
It is cool. And that gives you an idea of just how the awe of Mother Nature, the sheer power of Mother Nature. Mother Nature always has the upper hand. I always say, if you can't obey Mother Nature, then you better understand Mother Nature. And that's a big, we're destined to repeat, unfortunately, history if we're not careful when it comes to building codes and that sort of thing.
What are some myths that you like to dispel about hurricanes, extreme weather when you're on the news? Because I feel like I always hear you saying, listen to me, do what we're saying, plan, get the supplies, all that stuff.
I think the biggie is that a hurricane can or won't happen in Jacksonville because, like I said, it will. And sure, we have the same odds of a hurricane's eye coming within 50 miles of Jacksonville as the Big Bend does of Northwest Florida. So,
which has been hit mostly
exactly,
recently.
3 times in the last two years.
That's kind of an eerie.
Yeah, and that's going to be a real message that I'm going to try to get out this year. And it's not a scare tactic at all. It's just it's Mother Nature. It's reality. And so, you have to be careful with those stats and realize if you're on the ocean, you're warm side of the ocean, so the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, take your pick. Well, that's a whole other can of worms.
Different podcast.
Right. Florida or the East Coast, you could have a hurricane, and you're going to at one time or another if you live along that coast long enough.
Do you feel like the coastline? I mean, I just feel like the A1A going down to Volano, like over time, that's just destined to erode. Or
for 20 years, I've said that our coastline is not east of A1A; it's west of A1A. And it's obvious now that that's the case. And they continue to build and try to reconstruct there. And again, Mother Nature will win that battle eventually, no question to me. So
it kind of made me think too. I imagine you get calls from insurance companies.
You get a lot of calls from insurance companies.
Yeah.
I also get a lot of calls from people that are dealing with insurance companies.
Well, yes. Help me.
Combination of things there, but yes, and I'll be giving a talk to an insurance company. I do a lot of insurance company hurricane talks as we get into the hurricane season.
Okay, if you had to pick one piece of technology that you like working with that's coolest, what would you pick?
Doppler radar.
Doppler.
Yeah.
Doppler.
Yeah, it's so helpful, and it was
Doppler seems like an old word though, hasn't it been around?
Well, it
long?
is. It goes back to the 19th century.
So that is what is it? Explain.
It's based on the Doppler effect. The reason it goes back to the 19th century is because Christian Doppler discovered the Doppler effect, which is let's say a train, for example, as it goes by and it's blowing its horn. As it approaches, it gets louder, right? As it goes away, it fades. That's the Doppler effect. So that understanding of the Doppler effect's been around for a long, long time. And then it was incorporated into radars, actually going back as far back as the 1960s, 1970s were the first ones. Radar was developed in the 1940s during World War II, really by the Germans. U.S. quickly followed suit, though. And so they had radar on their planes, on their, all their, when they were doing sorties, they would go out, do their missions, and they had the radar technology, but they were looking for enemy aircraft. And so when they would come back from their sorties, they would have there would always be a meeting after they got back, and hopefully they got back. We know a lot of them didn't, but when they would get back, they'd be briefed immediately. They'd be debriefed immediately and asked what went well, what didn't go well, what was the best intelligence we gave you, what was the worst. And they'd say, well, gosh, the radar didn't work worth a darn because rain got in the way. That was the birth of weather radar, quite by accident in World War II.
Interesting.
Because they realized, we can see rain and storms with radar. And that was the birth of radar, the first generation of radar. And from there, then, the Doppler radar was first developed at the University of Oklahoma, put into regular use in the 1960s and 70s. I got to work on it when I was in college, which is amazing.
That is amazing.
And then from there, the radars, that proliferated from there. Very expensive piece of equipment, but priceless. And that is, to me, it's the most useful tool that I have in the First Alert Weather Center.
Got it. What do you? I think you've kind of covered this, but like, what do you think? What are some things you think wish more people would know about the weather and climate? I guess you're going to say it. It's Mother Nature wins.
Yeah, Mother Nature wins, and also there's no such thing as normal.
Okay.
We got to get rid of the word normal in the weather world.
Okay.
Average, I'll take average. I can do average. I'll do averages and I'll show averages. You'll never hear normal come out of my mouth. And I try to tell the rest of our meteorologists not to either, because there is no normal weather. It's like normal people. Are there any normal people?
No.
And how do you get normal?
Right.
How do you get average? Well, you get average by taking a bunch of extremes, putting them together, dividing by however many extremes you took, and then that becomes average. But is that normal? No, it's not normal. There is no normal weather. It ought to be changing quickly. It ought to be extreme. That extreme weather is nothing new. There's nothing new about extreme weather. Extreme weather's existed as long as our Earth has existed with an atmosphere.
Interesting.
We just didn't have, our cell phones to take video of everything and then throw it on the web and tell people.
Without getting too in depth in this, of like the weather patterns are getting extremely different on how they used to be because of this or this. They've always been extreme.
Always been extreme.
Interesting.
I'm not saying the weather's not changing.
Right.
The climate's not changing.
Right.
More importantly, I'm not saying it's not changing, the climate, but I would tell viewers and listeners to beware of the sensational headlines that make it sound like...
Just because we had a Cat 4 in Louisiana doesn't mean that we didn't have one 50 years ago, kind of.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I'd love to get rid of the word normal. And you'll never hear me use it. And you'll never see it on my air. I'll use average.
Okay.
But I'll never use normal. And I'd like to see normal get wiped away.
Okay. Well, we won't use normal anymore for sure.
And I'm not normal, that's for sure.
What's your favorite weather experience that you like the most? Snow, rain...
Thunderstorm.
Thunderstorm?
Yeah, I love thunderstorms. Don't have any idea why, really.
Just because it's pretty powerful.
It is. And when I was growing up, I might have said snowstorms, but we don't have those here. So, and I really don't miss the snow.
Right.
So I think if I can sit on, if I'm not at work, I'd love to be at home when an afternoon thunderstorm's coming through and I can just sit there.
Why in Florida does it look like about the world's going to end, and then 15 minutes later it's great? Why is it like that in Florida?
Typically, that's your summertime thunderstorms, late spring, summer, early fall, and it's because the sea breeze is moving in from the ocean. So it acts like a front. You get these storms that pop up suddenly. They're not really very large in size, but they're intense. They're large vertically, and they can put down 2-3 inches of rain in an hour.
Yeah.
And then the sun's out. You're right. And that's because they are driven by that sea breeze front, which is what we call we call it mesoscale, small scale feature that isn't long lasting. It's not a big storm system, and they don't last very long, but they can produce powerful thunderstorms, heavy rain, and that's the deal. And that's like typically a May through October thing here. Whereas in the winter we can get longer. They're not quite as pop up. They're not quite as haphazard and just here and there, but
it's always kind of comical having someone from up north and you're either playing golf or whatever, and like, we got to call everything out. No, just give it 15 minutes. You're good.
Exactly.
Have you seen the movie Perfect Storm?
I have. It's been a long time.
I feel like that was like when I knew you were coming in here. that scene where the meteorologist is saying, "This is coming together."
Right.
This Is that a thing? A perfect storm of epic magnitude?
Yeah, in which there was a hurricane in that story. By the way, I've worked with George Clooney's dad, Nick, in Cincinnati.
Interesting.
Believe it or not. And I met George briefly when he would have been under 10.
Okay.
Isn't that funny?
You should have stayed his friend. He treats his friends very well.
Yeah, right? I said that was a miss on my part. And his dad is a wonderful man. He was a local newsman. That's how I knew him.
Interesting.
Anyway, there is such a thing as, you could argue Helene was the perfect storm.
Okay.
Just, within the last year, as that hurricane came ashore, it was fast moving. It was very powerful already. It was moving into mountainous terrain. It had a lot of tropical moisture, and there was a front stalled to its north. It merged with that front. It had already been raining in the Appalachians for several days, heavily. And then you bring in a tropical system, and it just compounds that. Helene really was a land perfect storm, I think you could say. So yeah, there are instances of the perfect storm, and that is an example.
That was a true
in the
thing.
Northwest Atlantic.
Right.
Would be an example. Yeah.
Have you ever been up in one of those planes that go?
I have.
You've been in one of the planes that go into a hurricane?
Hurricane recon plane.
Literally, you flew into the storm.
Flew into the storm, which is actually a pretty funny story.
Were you petrified? Or?
No, it didn't bother me the least bit.
Wow.
What ended up happening was a very long thing because it was 03, so it's been a while. I've actually been scheduled multiple times since then to go up.
But you're working.
Right.
And
my boss is like, oh, it's too close. We got to cancel it. And I'm like, oh, man. But we went up. We flew out of Biloxi because most of them fly out of Biloxi, though some will fly out of Tampa now, too. Or quite a few will now fly out of Tampa. In fact, that's where I've gotten most of my recent reservations from. But it was a C-130, which are not comfortable planes. They're transport planes.
But they're very sturdy, obviously.
Very, very sturdy, very reliable. And so we flew into... we must have flown it, I guess maybe New Orleans, or maybe we flew into Biloxi, and then commercial. And then we got off and got to the base, go through all the prep. There was a news crew from CNN there we were flying with, and then a couple of other news crews. And so the day we're flying out, it's too close to Mexico that we can't go into their airspace. Okay. So we had to delay it. I don't know. I think it was almost 24 hours. And so we just did some more prep work. I did some more stories. And then finally we get to go up the next morning. And we fly into these seagulls and immediately lose an engine. And we start to take smoke on in the cockpit.
Haven't even hit the hurricane.
No, not close. And so all of a sudden, back from the Navy, Air Force Reserve folks, they're bringing out all these oxygen masks. And so I'm like, probably not good. And they're like, we're just going to turn around. And we did, and landed smoothly. It was no problem, and we were up in another plane. They always have a second plane ready to go. We were up within a half hour. Because that information is critical, especially back then. It is still to this day, but especially back then. So Well, sometimes.
Can you fly above it or no?
You do everything.
Okay.
The funny part about the coming back on that emergency landing was the CNN crew, the reporter that was embedded with us, was scared to death. Which, I get it. That's fine. But the crazy thing is, a few weeks later, I saw, or I think maybe it was a few months, he was embedded with our troops in Iraq. And I was like, I think I would take the hurricane.
Yeah.
In any case, you fly through it. It's about a 12-hour mission. It's really long. And after the initial adrenaline of seeing the eye and going through it, you're like, so can we go back now?
Right.
Because it's not a comfortable plane.
No.
It's bumpy. It's very, very cold. And I just remember getting back, it was in the evening. It was almost dark. And we were just exhausted. But priceless data and really a great
those pilots got to be unbelievable.
They've lost one plane in 60 or 70 years.
Unbelievable.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Well, finishing up here, I got a couple quick other questions. What's some advice you would have if someone wants to be a meteorologist?
Well, I give that kind of advice all the time. I see a lot of school students that are interested in meteorology. As far as meteorology goes, if you really think that's your interest, you got to buckle up on the math and science. Mm-hmm. Make sure you're taking as many math and science courses as you can.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah, it's essentially an engineering degree. Okay. So it is a lot of math and science. And then I always tell people, mostly, especially the younger students, find something you love. And if meteorology is your love, you'll be happy the rest of your life, no matter what you end up doing. Mm-hmm. I'm convinced about that about any job. I mean, it sounds cliche and simple. I am convinced of that.
We can tell you're passionate about that for sure. Can you talk about anything when you go to a cocktail party other than weather? I mean, do people like
Weather is,
you're kind of like the Tom Brady and somebody asking him about his Super Bowl all the time. Like,
yeah.
Does people ask you anything else or no?
No, it's almost always weather. And I have a lot of other interests, but they don't seem to care.
No.
But funny story. So not too long, well, within the last few weeks, I was on an international trip with my 85-year-old dad. It was awesome. But for about 3 days, and Dad talks a lot about, he's very proud of what I've done. Whether or not I deserve it, I don't know. And he was also an incredible parent. Both of them. My mom's passed,
well, they really
they supported me. It was
your
amazing.
interest.
So we were on this trip, and we were traveling with about 10 other people who were from all over the country and then all over the world in some instances. And nobody knew what we did. Nobody asked or anything. Nobody knew what I did. Dad's retired. And it wasn't until about the third, and some people had shown me their weather apps. They're like, here's what's going to happen and all of it, and I was
knowing that you're a weatherman?
Yeah.
That's
and
funny.
So about 3 days in, finally somebody asked me, and so I had to come clean, and then it spread like wildfire. And I had this guy come to me who with his phone, he's like, man, I was telling you all about this weather app, and you're a meteorologist. I'm like, it's
He's
fine.
like, man, I feel really dumb right now.
And one of the women at the table leaned over to me and whispered, she goes, I'll bet you're glad that nobody knows you here. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of nice.
Yeah, that is funny. Last question. Do you have a mentor or someone that you can point to in your career that the star at the top?
Nobody else would know him. But he's Craig Johnson, and he was at the NBC affiliate in the little town near the little town that I grew up in Iowa. And he would allow me, quote unquote, to come visit once a year because it was a big deal. It was 50 miles away, and Mom and Dad both worked full-time jobs. Mm-hmm. It wasn't an easy thing. And they would take me about once, maybe twice a year. And then I bent his ear going all the way through college about how to do things. And I credit him for everything that I've done. He probably doesn't know. I mean, I've told him that. People tell you all kinds of things. You don't have to believe it or not.
The gravity of it.
But I approached the career the way he approached it, which is quote unquote serious. Although I don't feel like I take myself too seriously for a number of reasons. But when it matters, I'm serious about trying to do it well. I want to be accurate. Mm-hmm. That's something I get all the time too. Is it must be nice to get paid when you're right.
right.
I've got an answer for that, but I don't know if we want to go there.
Right.
But so he would be number one. He's passed now, and then there are a number of people in the interim, and I watch a lot. I would watch a lot of people, and watch things around me. I'd watch reporters around, because reporters are a good reporter. It can and could very well be a very good meteorologist as far as delivery and communication. So there are a lot of people that I have looked up to and that have been mentors, but he would be number one. Nobody knows. I mean, people in Iowa would know him, but still probably. But
that's interesting.
He would be number one, and then I would say my college or my high school student counselor would be, for all the wrong reasons.
Right. It's funny that everybody's got a story that someone told them not to do something and that motivated them.
Yeah.
We were already motivated before then.
Yeah. It's good. I mean, I keep that in the back of my crawl, and I tell people, I'm like, if you want to do it, do it.
Yes. Don't
listen.
It's
okay.
For sure.
It's you may or may not be successful, but you'll never regret trying.
That's right. Well, this was amazing. I really appreciate your time. You coming here, not knowing who I was. This was really an honor. And Mike, thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. Good luck with the endeavor. It's awesome. It's good stuff.
Thank you, Mike. The Hometown Jax podcast is recorded and produced by First Coast Mortgage Funding, located in the heart of Jacksonville. Do you want to be our next guest? Visit our website at hometownjaxpodcast.com. We can't wait to hear your story.